Today's video is about weathering. While you're watching this video, make sure you take notes in your Topic 6 note packets. This is beginning on page 2. Now, a lot of people get the terms weathering and erosion confused. Weathering is simply when rocks are broken into smaller pieces. As we're going to see in a few minutes, erosion actually means something different, but it is related to weathering. As we'll see today, there are a lot of different types of weathering, but they all involve rock being broken down somehow. Erosion, on the other hand, is when rocks are moved from one place to another, and there are a lot of ways that that can happen as well. Eventually, whatever is moving the rocks runs out of energy and it drops them in another location. We call this deposition. There are two types of weathering. The first one we'll look at is called physical weathering. Write this down on page 3 of your note packets. In physical weathering, the rock is literally broken into smaller pieces. The first type of physical weathering is called abrasion. Abrasion is what happens when rocks hit other rocks and they break apart. Usually they are hitting each other because they're being moved by one of those agents of erosion. In every case, though, they hit each other, they break.
I said shake, rattle and roll. 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 Well, you never do nothing.
Our next type of physical weathering is called frost action. Frost action is what happens when water seeps inside of rocks, freezes, expands, and breaks the rock. As you probably know, water has this strange property. When it turns into a solid, it gets bigger. Now, if it happens to do that while it's inside the rock, it's going to expand inside the rock and wedge it apart. Then it thaws, turns back into a liquid, which allows it to seep deeper down inside the rock, and it freezes again. And you get this alternating freezing and thawing, which over time breaks the rock apart. A similar type of weathering is called plant action, only now plant roots do the work. The plant roots grow inside cracks in rocks, and over time they expand and they break the rock apart. Our last type of physical weathering is called exfoliation. Rocks form under a lot of pressure, and when that pressure is released, sometimes the rock can flake apart. When pressure is released from the rock, it expands. When it expands, it cracks. When it cracks enough, it begins to flake apart.
Good Lord, acid rain. I'm singing in the rain. I just singing in the rain. What a glorious feeling. Ah! It burns like a Glasgow bikini wax. Ah!
We better stay inside.
Okay, so maybe acid rain won't burn your skin like that, but it is an example of our next major type of weathering, and that's chemical weathering. Write this down in your notes. Chemical weathering happens when chemical reactions change minerals in the rock into different substances. Like physical weathering, there's a lot of different ways that can happen, but they all have this in common. Our first type of chemical weathering is pretty simple. Some minerals like halite, otherwise known as salt, will simply dissolve in water. Well, when they do that, that's chemical weathering. Our next type of chemical weathering is called oxidation. Oxidation is simply another word for rust. When iron reacts with oxygen in water, it gets rusty, just like an old truck. Well, a lot of minerals contain iron naturally, and they can also rust.
I met all my wives in traffic jams are just something women like about a pickup man.
Our final type of chemical weathering involves acids. And if you remember from the rock and mineral unit, some minerals like calcite will react with acid. Well, a lot of rocks are made of calcite, so therefore they will also react with acid. Well, that's chemical weathering. In nature, these acids can come from plants and from rainwater. Now, rainwater is naturally mildly acidic, but nowadays we're having more of a problem with acid rain because of pollution.